Hey, welcome back. It's Mr. Height. This is Perkiomen Valley Gifted Honors English 10th grade. Just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've done in the past week and let you know about some of the texts that I've been using and some of the things the kids have been thinking about. So last Wednesday we left off with the students having undergone a 4 days of really intense close reading on why is school the way it is. What are some ideas to make it better? And they came up with some what-if statements based on all those close readings and the discussions that they did. And so that's really sort of like an introduction to getting them used to how things are going to be different in this classroom. And the reason they're going to be different is because I'm really all about deeper learning. I know that term's not all that new, but the way I approach deeper learning in my classroom is by increasing student voice, increasing student inquiry, and increasing self-determined, self-directed learning. And so some of the things I'm going to talk about today will address that, and some of them won't, but I will let you know along the way. So last Thursday, the students got into creating their digital portfolios through a web-based platform called Seesaw. It's it's really popular at the elementary level, but I've seen it used at the high school level through a group called Teachers Going Gradeless. Links down below. If you're a teacher, you might want to check out that movement because it's really instrumental in getting students to own their own learning rather than always working for the carrot of the grade. So Seesaw is something that they were working with last week to figure out how that platform works, what its capabilities are. We're still going to be pursuing that. There's still a lot more to learn there for us, but it's going to be a way for us to exchange ideas, exchange information, and exchange activities and get feedback from each other. And then on Friday, they started writing their first writing assignment, which is called Who Am I as a Writer? Who Am I as a Reader? So this is an assignment that I created because as far as myself and a teacher in the classroom, I need to know those things about my students. I need to know how they see themselves, the self-image they have in terms of writer and reader. And so for that, they have to write 2 short pieces between 200 and 300 words long. They can be in any form, but they must address the question of who am I, or how do I see myself as a writer? How do I see myself as a reader? And so they could write poems, they could write television commercials, they could do the lyrics to a song, they could do a short explanatory or expository paragraph, but they all have to focus around a metaphor. Because when you're asking somebody to say, well, who am I as a writer? If they don't see themselves that way, that's really a question about an abstraction, a concept. So the only way to anchor that concept into the real world so that you can communicate it is through metaphor, right? And this is what we know from rhetoric, that metaphors have a source and a target, and the target lends to the source its concrete details, and so that brings the source down and anchors it into the real world. Pretty sure that's Aristotle. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, so they began that on Friday. That was due today. So what they did today is they did something called process writing. So I've spent a lot of time at Bard College's Institute for Writing and Teaching, and at the Institute for Writing and Teaching, all the learning that we do and all the teaching we do comes through writing. So it's writing to learn, writing to think. One of the things that we practice there a lot is after we write a piece, processing that writing. So process writing is all about like writing about how you went about writing. What were the moves going on in your mind? What choices were you making? Why did you make them? For my students, it's also about where were you when you wrote this? What time of day was it? Because I need to know those things in terms of understanding their process and the environment in which they write, so I can help them through things. So that was for today. Who am I as a reader? Who am I as a writer? If you're interested in that assignment, it's a great way to get to know your readers and your writers in your classroom. It's down below, and you're free to remix that assignment. And if you do, please get back to me and let me know about it. So on Monday of this past week, Monday is always what we call a cafe day. Thanks, Dan Ryder. Thanks, Amy Burvall. It's from your book, Intention, all about critical creativity in the classroom. And so cafe days are, for us, they're independent reading days. I'm doing independent reading because I really believe that unless we give students choice of what they want to read, we're really just setting ourselves up for our own failures, because if they don't like the book, they're just going to go to Spark Notes. They're going to go to Cliff Notes. They're going to go to whatever other notes are online, and they're going to do it that way. So, this really comes out in Penny Kittle's book, Book Love. It also comes out in Nancy Atwell's The Reading Zone. Now, Nancy, obviously, she's a middle school teacher, always has been. And I was a middle school teacher for 20 plus years. So when I saw this book and I picked it up, I'm like, I wonder if Nancy has any information for high school students. What's that chapter? High school. What would Nancy do if she were teaching high school? It's an awesome chapter, and she's pretty renegade about what it is that she would do. And I agree with her. So I'm doing this with my students on Mondays, sometimes even Tuesdays. But what did we do on Tuesday? Great question. So there is a text that I asked the students to read over the summer once, just for pleasure. And that text is Salman Rushdie's Haroun and the Sea of Stories. I'll get more into this later in another video that I'll make. But Haroun and the Sea of Stories is a great book because it's really a children's book, but it goes so much deeper. Because if you remember Salman Rushdie has a fatwa issued on his head for a book that he published and wrote called The Satanic Verses. The fatwa still exists. There's still people trying to kill him, to silence him, which is really what this is about. What happens when a storyteller can't tell stories anymore? So, but story is so important. And at the 10th grade level, when they come in this first week, what I really want to do with them this first month is I really want to explore why story matters. And this book gets into that. And it gets into it from through the form of a children's book. And that's what's brilliant about this, because they read it and they're like, this sounds like The Wizard of Oz. This sounds like other books I've read. Great. Except when you understand the history of the thing, it takes on an entirely different level. So then I can get into allegory. I can get into the hero's journey. I can get into so much in this. And so it's just going to pan out really well. It worked out really well last year. But the way I get into it is before I even start talking about the book, I engage them in something called the question formulation technique. Because remember, I'm all about increasing student inquiry. And one way that I've learned to do that is through this book, Make Just One Change. This book is by Dan Rothstein and Luz Santana. And this book is all about one process called the question formulation technique that we can use with our students to get them to probe deeper and to pursue their own questions. And so the way that you do that is you set a question focus. I set a question focus that is going to get them thinking about what goes on in this book, but at the same time, it's also going to get them to think in a much broader sense about reading in general. So the question focus that I set is, fictional stories are morally good lies. And then what they have to do is they have to spend 5 minutes asking as many questions as they can about that. And then they organize the questions. They categorize them as to whether or not they're open questions or closed questions. And then they have to rank order them. We didn't get to that yet, but that's the next step. So really, that's the week. We have a lot more to do with Haroun and the Sea of Stories. Today, they were doing process writing. Tomorrow, they're going to do some more process writing and finish up the work on that. I'll talk more about things like single point rubrics, going gradeless next week. All the links that you need if you're interested in anything I talked about are down below. Please feel free to subscribe. Smash that subscribe button. Thanks. See you next week.